Welcome to Furious Driving, and today I've gone Swedish subcompact executive saloon. Crazy. I'm driving a Volvo S40, well, Series 2 if you like. So while you quickly like and subscribe, have a word from our sponsors and then on with this interesting review. Furious Driving, proud to be supported by Diamond Bright, protecting, cleaning and caring for the Furious fleet and for yours with 10% off using code FD10. Follow the links in the description below. Now the S40 fitted into an interesting market segment. It's not really one that exists anymore. Think sub-family compact but executive version. So Rover 400/45, the Volkswagen Jetta. It's all the comfort and prestige of a big saloon within a smaller package. So not quite a BMW 3 Series or a Passat even or an A4, but the Volvo S40 or the Rover 400 ticks that box for you. Now the first generation of the S40 came out in 1995 and it was quite an interesting thing in its own right. It was based on the old Mitsubishi Charisma and it was the last car built by Volvo at their Nedcar factory, the old DAF factory in Born in the Netherlands. But it was fundamentally just a Mitsubishi Charisma which cost half as much again, although it was significantly more luxurious on the inside. And the design language of that generation, it really did echo the 850 and so forth of the early 1990s. But come 2004, there was a complete revamp. The S40 was redesigned, reintroduced. It could have had an entirely new name because it was such a fundamentally different car which shared virtually no components from the previous generation. Gone was the Mitsubishi malarkey, in came Ford. Because first of all, by now, Ford owned Volvo for one thing, so they had access to the whole Ford toy box. Secondly, Peter Horbury had taken over as the design director at Volvo, and this generation was the first model entirely designed under his direction, so you could really see the new styling direction he was taking. You can see the V70 echoes in the front of the car and the shoulder haunches. In fact, it was built on an entirely new platform called either the Volvo P1 platform or, more widely, the Ford Global C platform, because it shares its underpinnings not only with the C30, the C70 and other Volvo models, it's also the Focus Mk2 and the C-Max and the Mazda 3 and a bunch of other non-Volvo cars, because Ford had fingers in pies back then. They really did. But this makes it a very interesting hodgepodge of componentry. The chassis was basically redesigned by Volvo. Even though it's a Ford global platform, Volvo kind of redesigned and rejigged it to make it a little bit longer and add their own little twists to it. But mechanically, it's virtually a Focus. But they've made changes there as well. So it's no longer completely a Focus because they've retuned the steering to make it feel more luxurious. But it does mean it's a little dead compared with the Focus. It's more, I don't know, just heavier feeling. But of course, Volvo being Volvo, yeah, typical Swedish thing like the Saabs, they couldn't leave things alone. They couldn't let it lie. So despite the fact they had access to all the Ford parts bin gearboxes and things, they still had to re-engineer their own. I believe their automatics are based on Getrag or Getrag units, but they were completely re-engineered and given a different name. They've also got 5- and 6-speed manuals as an option as well, which I think I would probably prefer in this particular car. Now, because this was a mashup of Volvo and Ford parts, you can look under the bonnet and you can see things like the Mk2 logo here on the top of the struts, although it actually uses Volvo V70 wheel hubs as well. It's a really interesting mixture of bits from across the Ford and Volvo empires. Under the bonnet, there were 8 or so engines you could choose from. In petrol form, you could have a 1.6, a 1.8 or a 2-litre 4-cylinder, or the 5-cylinder in 2.4 format. And that was available in a couple of different states of tune. This is the 2.4i, making 168 horsepower. Of course, there was also the D5, which is the same engine, but a slightly different capacity, I think through crankshaft probably. But that makes either 216 or 225 horsepower, depending which generation you're looking at. That's just the petrols. Then there were the diesels. There was a 1.6 and a 2-litre 4-cylinder and 5-cylinder 2-litre and 2.5s. That's just too many. Then there were 2 kinds of manual and 2 kinds of automatic gearbox. Ridiculous. Just so much of everything. I don't know how they made a profit. Maybe that's why the Chinese own them now. So, looking around the outside of the Generation 2 S40, you can see how that style has evolved from the first generation. This was the first car that was completely designed under the new British designer Peter Horbury. And you can see the new styling direction that the brand was taking with this pronounced sporty nose. They just did describe it as sporty in the literature at the time. And these headlights that flow into the wing and this big, strong shoulder. These elements were slightly there in the Generation 1, but have all evolved into their pinnacle at this generation of Volvo. So moving down the side, you can actually really forget this is based on a Focus platform because it looks so different. This is largely because the platform is actually stretched a little bit to give the four doors and the length. And of course there was the estate version, the V40 as well, which was called by an Italian magazine the most beautiful estate car in the world. One curious thing about these though is that although you do see a lot of rusting cars of this generation on this platform, you don't see many of these rusting, so Volvo clearly did something different to theirs. Right, so climbing into the car, we've got the typical of the early noughties, lovely Scandi light, airy feeling design in this interior. It's made a little heavier by the fact we've got this dark wood because this SE trim is aimed at the luxury end rather than the more traditionally Scandinavian light wood, light metal kind of look. So we've got the floating dashboard, but weirdly it feels kind of heavy despite being the incredibly light design and styling. So an interesting little juxtaposition of styles just there. We have of course got a vast T-shelf area, so once again a smorgasbord of panoplia of food. Is that a word, panoplia? I'm making words up on the fly. I might be, doesn't matter, it means lots. So yeah, lots of T-shelf, excellent area, but a large slope off so teas will run onto your lap if you spill them. Let me grab you off the tripod and show you around a little bit more. Okay, starting off on the doors, it's not quite a beige interior, but it's like an olive tan light colour. Quite a curious one. It kind of goes with the dark wood, but it's a slightly darker feel to the interior, a little more sombre. We have got tweeters up in this curiously metallic-y brown plastic. We've got fake plastic door handles and big chunky locks for, I guess if you've got a bear coming at you, you want to be hitting that lock in a hurry. I think that's probably why they did that. Nice leather panel in here for your armrest area, the wooden armrest as I said, and we've got the biggest speaker and the smallest door pocket I've possibly ever seen. Apparently in the update in 2007 we got that reversed, so we've got usable door pockets at last. So this is our floating dashboard. There is apparently a cup holder option you can maybe seek out on eBay for these things, because currently it's a slightly useless area. It's a great idea for making the car look and feel light and airy, but basically pretty much rubbish for anything apart from glasses to go in there. Now you notice this big, slightly unusual plastic key which slots in at the top of the dashboard just here. Let's flick this on so we can actually see the radio. And this is, as I said in the V70 recently, nothing dates as fast as cutting edge technology, and so this was a very exciting looking radio display a little while ago. Now it looks quite dated and quite interesting really, but retro in a good way, we'll call it that. But I do love the fact we've got all these individual buttons for literally everything, which makes it so easy, so muscle memory, you can do this on the fly. We've also got big air vents here and it's a very plain dashboard, not a lot going on here. They've kept it very simple, very, well, this is the Scandinavian design ethos I guess, keep it nice and simple, although Peter Horbury was British. Moving down, we've got an automatic transmission in this particular car, with a manual override, which apparently doesn't work on this one, but let's face it, they never do. Traction control, and this is another curiosity, by the early noughties, the 12 volt socket is labelled as a 12 volt socket, not a cigarette lighter, and there is no ashtray in here at all. So your sweetie wrappers do have to sit down here, or if you're really organised, look at the size of this chunky button on here. That is proper chunk in this little tiny armrest cubby. Now moving back in front of the driver, we have got two things. We've got a very minimal steering wheel. It's a lovely sort of firm leather wheel which feels quite nice and under your grip. It's got a few buttons but not too many. We've got cruise control and we've got audio. Nothing for the phone, nothing for the nav because there's no nav in this car. So it's quite a nice retro go-between of ultimate too many buttons and previous generations of no buttons at all. We do of course have an airbag and the horn test. Elk will scatter at the sound of that parp. They fear the parp. Behind that we have got their chunky old chunkmonger instrument stalks for indicators and wipers on the left and the right, and behind both of those stepped a very long way away. It's really beyond an arm's reach is your dials. Lucky they're quite big because you need binoculars otherwise. The speedometer going up to 160 miles an hour. Rev counter redlining at 6,500 RPM, which is quite impressive on an everyday car. Little sub-dials for our temperature and fuel, and a few other little oddments on the LCD. It's 8 degrees, it's blooming freezing. Before we get in the back, let's have a quick look at these seats, which are lovely Volvo design again. This kind of very human shaped, organic feel of the early noughties Volvos. And again, like a light olive, a kind of beigey grey colour. Quite curious. In fact, the entire interior is very monochromatic with this beigey light tan colours everywhere. It feels quite light in some respects, but then you hit the dark wood and it feels quite dark again, so curious. We do though have a nice big sunroof, and we've even got, no, they've deleted it. We've not got the sunroof glasses holder, that's a shame. But check out how chunky, they do like a chunky switch in this car, because that sunroof switch is super chunk. Let's have a quick look in the back and see what we make of that. Now, I'm not saying Volvo were being a bit tight with their equipment, but yes, you do get the SIPS accident protection to keep your SIPS safe with your hips, but you get an electric seat on the driver's side, which might be optional. We're not 100% sure on this particular spec. But the passenger has to lumber on with a manual seat. Oh dear, how mid to late 80s. Right, clambering aboard the back of the car. I've just moved the seat forward from my driving position and there's still no legroom. The seats are incredibly, well, comfortable and opulent armchairs, basically. Really, really nice. We've got more of the dark wood effect in the door grab. We've got electric window, the nice satiny looking stuff. Tweeter and a proper speaker. 12-volt socket in the back of the thingy. But a little bit tight in here, quite tight for headroom. Even though the platform is extended over the Focus, it's still quite tight here in the back. We've even got a little pocket in the centre, so you can have little odds and ends down there. Isn't that cute? And one little nicety which we've got in here, we've got, well, two niceties in fact. We've got a blind, so you can pull this little thing. I can't do a left-handed reversal. The hook's up there, so you've got a sun blind to keep the sun off. You've got airbags in the C-pillars, and not many cars can boast that. A quick look in the boot before we drive off again. One important update they made when they facelifted the car in 2007 was they moved the Volvo letters slightly further apart, which was a significant thing a lot of owners are called for. The boot is actually quite a good size. It goes back a long way and it's quite wide, but the aperture to get into it is really quite small. I mean, if you're kidnapping people and bundling them into the back of a car, you have got a job on your hands with anyone who's more than, I don't know, like a 32-inch waist getting in the back of there, because, yeah, pick your victims carefully with the Volvo S40, that's my buying advice. But do take a moment to appreciate this hinge mechanism on the side of the boot. It's got little tiny struts up here which are quite powerful, but look at this whole multi-stage cantilever twisting element. That's a clever old bit of hinge work there. I'm impressed. And the marketing for this car was a little bit unusual as well. When it was released, they showed it to the world initially with a mysterious 8-minute long video called The Mystery of Delaro, which was a pseudo-documentary about a mystery of people buying the same car in the same small town near Stockholm. Apparently created by a fictitious, it turns out, Venezuelan filmmaker. And it was accompanied by a 4-minute video explaining the background of the video. But it actually turned out the film was made by Spike Jonze. So he is not unknown at all. He's actually quite well known, it turns out. So Volvo really were tapping into their inner Scandi noir credentials, trying to build a bit of mystery and excitement around this new executive subcompact saloon. Now, considering this car is so closely related to the Ford Focus, it's surprising how utterly different it feels. The size of the dashboard structure means that it actually feels a little bit cramped in here compared with a Focus. With the steering wheel, which is actually very, very big, pushed away from myself, it does feel a little bit more spacious, but it does feel a little bit penned in despite the airy floating dashboard design. In terms of suspension and steering and things, even though again it's all Ford units, they've must have changed the spring rates and the steering rates and so forth to make it feel a little less lively compared to its Ford companions. But that's the market they were going for. It was the executive, comfy, the cruising market rather than the sporty market, even though, of course, there was the D5 and the R-Design versions, which are very different animals entirely because they've got that Focus ST version of the engine, or variants of, dropped under the bonnet. Now, although 168 horsepower doesn't sound immense from a 2.4 litre 5-cylinder engine, there's a ton of torque in this thing, and you just have to dab the throttle and it is away like a scalded cat. It is quite surprising how effortlessly this thing does fly away from you. It does have quite an interesting, fun note as well, because let's face it, nothing sounds quite as fun and weird as a 5-cylinder. Straight 6s, V6s, V8s, they all sound amazing in their own right, but a 5-pot has got its own unique warble, which I'm a huge fan of. And that mountain of torque is reflected in the MPG, because this thing gets well over 40 to the gallon. However, because of the emissions rating on it, which is not good, it's over 400 quid a year to tax the thing, which is I guess why you can pick up some incredible bargains. This car is immaculate and has actually won an award at a Volvo event for being so lovely, and yet it was still something of a bargain, I guess largely because of the tax. At the time, Volvo were chucking out so many versions of very similar cars, it was quite remarkable. So you got this car as the S40, you got the C30 as a 2-door hatchback, you got the V50 as this car as an estate car, you got the C70, which is virtually this car slightly larger as a convertible. Volvo were doing like Rover back in the 90s, giving you every possible connotation on a platform. And that, of course, meant that they could afford to have a dozen different engines and gearbox configurations that was catering for every possible whim. So there we have it. This is a very comfortable, very wafty car. I keep driving wafty cars lately, and I've done yet another one in a different size. One size doesn't fit all, there's a waft for everybody. So if you've enjoyed this video, as always, please hit like and subscribe. Head over to the furiousdriving.co.uk web store for mugs, hats, t-shirts and more. And join us again next time, driving something completely different.